Hello Idle Hero fans, thanks for tuning in today as I'm going to be making a quick video talking about how to actually defeat the Aiden cheese that's kind of going around. If you look at the arena right now, there's actually two players using it. This guy is using a slightly different variation of the one that I showed you on the video I made, where he's actually using a corpse demon as his main tank, as the unit who survives past the initial blast. And then there's this gentleman who is the exact same team that I showed you when I did the video about that last week, running two 13-star Aidens and basically a bunch of boost. So a lot of people are starting to catch on to how you can defeat this. Obviously, they're still pandering around like 3 and 5. They're still doing extremely well with this comp, but I think as time goes on, more and more people are going to notice ways to kind of defeat these teams. The first one that you want to note is just don't attack these teams. If you see that they're in your lineup when you're choosing your battles, don't fight them. They're primarily a defensive team anyway, so if these players want to progress on the leaderboards, they generally need you to attack them. So if you don't do that, they won't get boosted up. However, they may have an alternate team that is better for fighting, but at least then they're kind of forced to work within the parameters that everyone is used to, and you don't have to move your team around just to deal with this kind of cheese. The first big one I would say for dealing with this kind of cheese is actually something like Asmodel, because the primary way that teams like this win is they I actually got caught off there for a second, guys. When I clicked on Asmodel, he did his little animation. I thought something had started up on my computer. Anyway, when they try to win these fights, they're mostly looking for the initial explosion to kill off most of their high DPS characters on the enemy team, so that way they can just kind of stall out the game until 15 rounds and they win by default because they're the defensive team and they stalled it out. But a hero like Asmodel is actually pretty difficult to kill in one shot, especially if you have the stone sword on him. Or even better, if you don't have, or not even better, but if you don't have the magic stone sword, you can put something on him like the fearless armor, and fearless armor will do very well to make sure that he stays alive. It will take away some of his damage, of course, because you're not going to have that 21% increase on attack. However, Asmodel's base damage is very high, so if he gets left alone with like a cruise or something trivial like that, he's going to have a much easier time dealing with it. Corpse Demon might be a good counter to Asmodel specifically, like we've seen that guy in the 3rd spot using as his main tank, because Corpse Demon is very good at crowd controlling warriors. So Asmodel might not be the best choice versus that specific comp, but in general, Asmodel does very well against these types of teams because he can blow up the rest of their team, survive the explosion from Aiden, and then continue to attack after the first onslaught has happened. Now, another thing you want to kind of pair this with is that if you are going to run these kind of tanky bruisers, what you want to do as well is you can actually put the healing pet with them, Bambi, instead of using the damage pet, because damage shouldn't really be an issue against teams that have a bunch of destroyers and crews and an Aiden. So what you can do is you can go with the healing pet because it gives you armor and sustainability, so that way you're less likely to get one shot when the explosion does happen as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. A lot of people might not be able to switch back and forth between top tier pets just yet, but as time goes on, I imagine like everyone in the top 200 has that capacity. So if you're a top 200 player and you're struggling to break in the top 100 to top 50 because these teams, you attack them and they push you down, if you want to be able to get the points off of these players, be a little bit more willing to switch over your pets, because that's going to be a big component moving forward. The second one I would say is going to be Kameth. And Kameth is specifically good because he only attacks the back row, really, with his auto attacks as well as with his ability. And what that means is that the 2 units in the front line are not going to die as quickly, meaning they will not be powering up the Aiden in the back row. Plus, of course, he has crowd control, so if he does crowd control the Aiden until he dies, Aiden's not going to get to use his ability. As we've seen, that's not the main point of this kind of comp anyway, but reducing the damage of the initial explosion is a big product of what you want to do with Kameth, and that will put a damper on what these Aiden comps are looking to do. He's also pretty tanky. He's not as tanky as Asmodel, of course, but he can survive a bit of damage and might be able to get past that initial explosion if they don't have their 2 front units destroyed as well. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that a lot of these Aiden comps basically rely on the fact that everyone is going to be dead before Aiden, except for maybe one unit. And then Aiden's going to blow up and destroy everybody. But the less units you actually kill before killing Aiden is going to give you a bonus on the fact that he's going to be a lot weaker when he does explode. Another good example of this would be Valentino. Not so much because he attacks the back row. He does attack 4 random targets, however, so there's a chance that you're not going to be hitting all of these weaker units that you don't want killed before you kill the Aiden. But another thing is going to be this barrier ability, which is when he's below 80% health, it increases his damage reduction. So you could actually use Valentino as a tank against these comps, and then when he hits below 80% HP just from normal attack damage from whatever they're using, including the Aiden, then he's going to actually have a good amount of damage reduction so that he can survive that initial blast. And if you pair that again with the healing pet, it's going to make it a lot easier for him to survive. And his damage is very high, and he adds a lot of crowd control. So if you can get him past the initial explosion, he's going to be very good at taking down the likes of Corpse Demon or a Cruz or a Michelle or whatever happens to be left over that your opponent's Aiden team was looking to have survive into the later rounds. And of course, the last one I want to mention is just stuff like, of course, Faithblade. This stuff goes without saying, but basically, as people get more 13-star Faithblades, it's going to be a lot harder for these Aiden comps to work because he's going to be able to one-shot them before they actually get a lot of kills off. So if Aiden, or if Faithblade happens to kill Aiden first, and Aiden is the first thing that dies, then that really sucks for the Aiden comp because pretty much all of the damage is going to be mitigated. You're not going to get any of that really good stacking ability. Now, of course, Faithblade is vulnerable to Aiden as well because of his low HP. He does get one shot if this doesn't work, so that is always the risk you're going to run with heroes like Faithblade. Mim is pretty much the same thing. Mim is a little bit more survivable than Faithblade, but I think his health and his armor are still within the realm of pretty easily one-shotted by an Aiden explosion. However, he's a lot better at one-shotting and draining the abilities of Aiden. So he can petrify very easily, he can steal energy, as well as he just has a ton of damage. Like, the 400% is just absolutely ridiculous, combined with everything else that he does. And he's immune to crowd control. Now, Faithblade is immune to stuns, which is a little bit more specific. Still very useful, especially against teams that if they're using Cruz and Aiden. But Mim is just resistance to crowd control altogether. So no matter what they're using, if they're trying to use that Corpse Demon to freeze your units, and Faithblade can be frozen, however Mim cannot. So there are certain advantages to each one. But basically, these heroes that can one-shot this Aiden before he gets time to ramp up is really going to be good moving forward. As we see more 13-star Mims, more 13-star Faithblades, we're going to see this kind of cheese fall off, I feel. Especially if people start incorporating things like Azmodal, like Kameth, and those two are very popular already in the meta. So as people get those two 13-star, you're going to start seeing more damage. Being able to be survived with that Aiden burst and then be able to retaliate. And Valentino as well, very popular hero, already very strong in the meta. So as people start to develop these heroes more and are more willing to play around with using like Valentino as a tank, for example, it's going to become a lot easier to deal with this cheese. I think this is just basically a transition period between 10 and 13 star as more people catch on to those kinds of tricks, and as they catch on to their team actually building up to compare against Aiden. Because that's one of the big things that's in Aiden's favor here, is that Aiden's a very common hero, so he's actually very easy to 13-star, whereas some of these other heroes might just not be that way. Valentino's not very common, Azmodal's not very common, so these heroes are very difficult to level up, but as they do catch up, we're going to see a change in the flow of combat when it comes to these cheese teams. Huge shout out to Dodging Rain, of course, who helped me with all this information. We've been kind of working this out, testing it a little bit. He has an Aiden comp that he can run, so we've been kind of running our teams against each other here to see if we can come up with a good response to this, and I think we're doing okay so far. There's still some work, of course, because my team is not as leveled up as it needs to be. If I could get Kameth the 13-star or Azmodal the 13-star, we might see some differences, but right now these are our results, so a huge shout out to him, and thank you so much for helping me with this video. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. Of course, this is not a definitive list of the best heroes. These are just some of the ones we came up with. If you guys have any other examples of good ways to shut down Aiden, post them in the comments below and let me know what you guys think. And as always, guys, have a great day.